Its judgment was not in fire, but in light. Commander Eva Rostova watched the ghost on her view screen. It was a shard of absolute black against the stellar dust of Epsilon Eridani, a dead system picked clean by generations of scavengers. The object, designated X-37, absorbed all sensor returns with an unnerving totality. It was less a thing and more a hole in the universe, a wound in space-time that refused to heal. Her ship, the conquered patrol cutter Vigil, felt like a mayfly hovering near a mountain of obsidian. The official mission was to chart anomalies, but the unofficial one, whispered down from Sector Command, was to watch this specific patch of void. Someone was coming for it. The Vautour Syndicate was coming. They were not pirates in the classic sense. They were asset strippers who used overwhelming force to legitimize their claims after the fact. Below, on the ruined fang of a shattered ring world, their scout ships were already setting up gravitic drills and energy lances. They saw a prize, a relic of some forgotten pre-diaspora culture. Rostova felt a cold dread that they were profoundly mistaken. There was a hum in the structure of her own ship, a sympathetic resonance that her engineer Ben Carter couldn't isolate. It was an echo from the anomaly, a whisper across 10,000 years of sleep. Faint sigils like dormant circuitry could just be seen tracing its hull when light from the distant pulsar caught it at the right angle. Sleeping arrays waited for a key they no longer remembered. The law was a shield, not just a sword. Commander came the crisp, synthesized voice of the Vigil's fleet-mind magister. The Vautour flagship, Gilded Talon, has translated from F-space at the system's edge. They are hailing us. Threat assessment remains unchanged. They possess overwhelming tactical superiority. The AI's tone was flat, a recitation of fact that ignored the cold sweat on Rostova's palms. She glanced at her tactical officer, Jian Li, whose knuckles were white on her console. Li saw a fight they couldn't win. Rostova saw a desecration about to happen. On screen, Magister, she ordered, her voice betraying none of her apprehension. An oily, self-satisfied face appeared, framed by the gaudy gold and ivory bridge of his heavy cruiser. This was Oren, a man whose reputation for casual brutality was legendary in the outer sectors. He smiled, a predator's gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "Commander Rostova." He began, his voice a low purr. "A pleasure to see the Concorde taking an interest in local archaeology. We are merely conducting a salvage operation, as per our claim filed with the sector registry. You are, of course, free to observe. Your claim is for a derelict." Oren, Rostova countered, keeping her tone level. "That object is something else. It is not listed on any chart. It is a first contact scenario until proven otherwise." Oren laughed, a short, ugly bark. "First contact with a rock, commander. My surveyors have confirmed it is a pre-diaspora artifact of immense value. My claim stands. Power down your weapons and maintain a respectful distance, or the Conquered will be filing a very different kind of report." The transmission cut. Silence was its question, and intent was the only answer. "He's baiting us," Yun said, her voice tight. "He wants us to fire first, to give him legal cover to eliminate us." "He doesn't need cover," Ben Carter added from his station, his face pale. "Commander, their cruiser is displacing 3 times our mass. Its weapon apertures are glowing. They're charging main batteries." Rostova stared at the obsidian anomaly. The hum felt stronger now, a vibration in her teeth. It wasn't a rock. It was a ship, an ark maybe, or a tomb, or something far stranger. It had slept through the rise and fall of empires, silent and patient. It deserved better than to be cracked open like a geode by avaricious thugs. She felt a protective instinct that was entirely illogical, a duty that went beyond her conquered mandate. This place was hallowed ground, even if no one knew the name of its god. An ancient choice was a promise made to the future. She made a decision. It was a wild gamble, a shot in the deepest dark. Ben, can you get a high-fidelity scan of those sigils on its hull, cross-reference them with the deepest archives? I'm looking for a protocol, a handshake, anything. Commander, we've tried, Ben replied, his fingers flying across his console. The surface is paradoxical. It has no measurable energy signature yet. It defeats every scan we throw at it. It's like trying to photograph a black hole with a flash camera. Then don't scan it, Rostova said, leaning forward. The idea was half-formed, a ghost of intuition. Talk to it. Magister, open a narrow-beam communication channel, all frequencies. I'm not sending a message. I'm sending our credentials. The AI's optical sensor swiveled to face her. Commander, a broadcast of our mission charter command authentications and conquered legal framework is a significant security risk. The Vautour already know who we are. Rostova snapped. I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to the anomaly. Do it. Memory was not a record. It was a responsibility. A civilian freighter pilot hauling ore out of the asteroid belt saw it happen on his long-range telescope. He had been watching the standoff, expecting a brief, brilliant flash of light as the Concorde cutter was inevitably erased. Instead, he saw a line of pure data stream from the smaller ship toward the silent dark object. It was invisible to the naked eye, but on his scope it looked like a thread of silver being woven into a shroud of night. He didn't know what he was seeing, but he knew it was important. He started recording. On the Vigil's bridge, the air grew thick with tension. The Gilded Talon had finished charging its weapons. Oren was giving them one last chance to flee. But Rostova's eyes were fixed on the anomaly. For a long, heart-stopping minute, nothing happened. The data streamed into the void and vanished. Gian began to shift in her seat, her hand hovering over the firing stud for their own hopelessly outmatched railguns. Maybe a final act of defiance was all they had left. And then a light appeared. It started as a single point on the obsidian surface, a soft, silver luminescence. It traced one of the dormant sigils, then another and another. A network of light spread across the immense hull, a constellation being born in utter silence. The hum in the Vigil's frame intensified, no longer a faint vibration, but a clear, resonant tone like a struck bell the size of a moon. It did not offer power. It demanded accountability. What's happening? Gian whispered, her aggression momentarily forgotten in the face of sheer awe. Energy readings are impossible, Ben stammered. There's no power source. It's not generating light. It's permitting it. It's like it's peeling back a layer of physics. The sigils formed a complex, interlocking pattern of lines and nodes, a circuit board of cosmic scale. The central symbol, a stylized representation of a balanced scale held within a perfect circle, pulsed with a steady, serene rhythm. The light was not threatening. It was an awakening. A question had been asked, and an answer had been given. A new voice spoke, not over the comms, but directly in their minds. It was not a voice of words, but of concepts of pure, unassailable logic. It felt ancient, vast, and deeply, deeply weary. Query it projected a wave of understanding that washed over the crew. Rostova felt the query probe her intentions, her history, her very soul. It was not a hostile scan. It was a formal request for an accounting. This wasn't a warship waking up. It was a courthouse opening its doors. A just law is a mirror to the soul. The Vautour were seeing it too. On the bridge of the Gilded Talon, Oren stared in disbelief. His salvage target was lighting up like a festival display. His first thought was that it was a defense mechanism, a prelude to an attack. "Report," he snarled at his sensor officer. "Sir, we can't get a lock." The energy is passive. It's not radiation. It's not plasma. The ship is just visible now, and our systems are getting flooded with data. What data it looks like? Legal code, sir. Concord statutes, cross-referenced with, I don't know, something older. A galactic legal precedent registry. It's citing cases from before the diaspora. Oren's greed warred with a primal flicker of fear. This was not the simple treasure he had anticipated. This was something complex, something with rules. He hated rules he didn't make himself. He made his own decision, one born of arrogance and frustration. A tyrant's first weapon is the corruption of meaning. It's a scare tactic, he declared, his voice a low growl. A Xeno relic's last gasp. Target the primary sigil. Fire a warning shot. Let's see how it likes having its sacred texts scorched. On the vigil. Rostova felt the mental probe recede, replaced by a feeling of acceptance. A connection had been forged. The presence communicated. Directive Rostova whispered, stunned. She was in command of a ship that dwarfed a city, a relic from the dawn of human expansion. The weight of that responsibility was crushing. Commander Jian shouted, pointing at the view screen. A lance of focused energy, a brilliant white spear, erupted from the gilded talon and crossed the void in an instant. It was aimed directly at the central pulsing sigil of the awakened ship. The universe does not bargain. It only counts. The beam struck. There was no explosion, no flare of shields. The light of the energy lance simply stopped. It hit the sigil and was absorbed, vanishing without a trace. The silver light of the symbol flickered for a moment, then pulsed brighter, its rhythm quickening. The ancient mind broadcast its tone, now carrying an edge of cold iron. Oren saw his warning shot get swallowed whole. The flicker of fear grew into a raging fire. His ship's power levels dipped as the cannon tried to pour more energy into the beam, but it was like throwing gasoline on a star. The anomaly just drank it in. Cease fire, he bellowed. Cut the beam, but it was too late. A new process had begun. The awakened ship, the obsidian anchorage, began to move. Not through space, but through its own nature. Panels on its dark hull slid aside, revealing not weapon ports, but vast crystalline arrays. They were mirrors polished to a perfection that physics should not allow. They began to pivot slowly and deliberately, catching the light of the distant pulsar. A debt of violence must always be repaid in kind. A single, impossibly thin beam of blue-white light shot from one of the arrays. It wasn't aimed at the gilded talon. It struck a piece of the shattered ring world, a crescent of metal and rock miles long. The beam hit a specific point, and the entire fragment began to glow, its metallic structure resonating with the focused energy. More beams lanced out from the anchorage, striking other pieces of the ring, turning the entire debris field into a colossal phased array. "What is it doing?" Ben asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and scientific ecstasy. "It's using the ring fragments as a focusing lens. The geometry, it's perfect. It's turning the whole system into an optical instrument." Rostova understood then. The anchorage was not a warship. It was a judge. It did not create weapons. It used the facts of the environment to deliver a verdict. The Vautour had introduced a massive amount of energy into the equation. The anchorage was simply going to balance the books. The truth has its own gravity. The energy from the pulsar, which had bathed the system in harmless radiation for millennia, was now being gathered. The ring fragments, guided by the anchorage's precise beams, collected and focused the stellar wind, the magnetic fields, the raw energy of the star itself. They were shaping it, compressing it into a single coherent point. and that point was aimed directly at the gilded talon. Commander Magister stated its synthesized voice for once, carrying something that sounded like awe. The hostile vessel has been designated as the focal point of a system-scale energy convergence. The principles are analogous to gravitic lensing, but the medium is not space-time. The medium is consequence. On Oren's bridge, alarms screamed. Every sensor was blinded by a flood of incoming energy. He could see it out of his viewport, a gathering storm of light, a terrible sharpening of the universe's glare. The very space around his ship seemed to be twisting, preparing to deliver a blow of stellar proportions. "Get us out of here," he roared. "Emergency jump now!" His navigator's hands flew over the console, but it was no use. "I can't get a lock. Space-time is too distorted. The energy field is pinning us in place. Justice is the universe balancing its accounts." The focused light of the pulsar, gathered and aimed by the ancient ruins, struck the gilded talon. It was not a violent, explosive impact. It was a moment of perfect, terrible clarity. The cruiser's shields, designed to stop plasma bolts and kinetic rounds, flared and died in less than a second, overloaded by a power source as old as the system itself. The energy did not detonate the ship, it unmade it. Armor plating sublimated, power conduits overloaded and melted. The gaudy bridge with its ivory and gold became a furnace of white light. Oren's final terrified scream was lost in the silent, cleansing fire. The entire event was over in the time it takes a man to draw a breath. One moment the gilded talon was there, a monument to greed and power. The next, it was a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated gas and molten slag. Its stolen energy returned to the cosmos. The obsidian anchorage had not fired a single shot. It had simply held up a mirror. A great stillness descended upon the system. The light from the ring fragments faded, the resonant hum from the anchorage softened back into a quiet, steady thrum. The sigils on its hull glowed with a calm, watchful intensity. The cloud of vaporized metal that was once a cruiser began to cool and disperse. On the Vigil's bridge, no one spoke. They had just witnessed a summary judgment delivered on a scale they had never imagined. It was terrifying, beautiful, and profoundly just. Rostova let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Her hands were shaking. Power teaches you nothing. Its application is the only lesson. The anchorage communicated its mental voice, calm and dispassionate. Rostova swallowed hard. Precedent, the presence explained. Ben Carter looked up from his console, his eyes wide. "Commander, I think I know what this is. The first concordance, the old law. They're myths. Bedtime stories about the very first human interstellar government before the diaspora. They were said to have created saint ships, vessels that weren't warships but mobile bastions of law and memory. They didn't enforce the peace with guns. They did it by creating consequences. This ship teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars." A blinking light on Magister's console drew Rostova's attention. "Commander," the AI said, "I am detecting multiple F-space translations at the system's edge. A Concorde fleet has arrived. Heavy cruisers, destroyers, and a carrier. They are broadcasting a priority directive." On screen, Rostova said, her heart sinking. She knew this wasn't over. An act of this magnitude would not go unnoticed. The face that appeared was stern and etched with authority. It was Admiral Kask, the commander of the sector fleet, and a notorious hardliner from the Ordo Legalists, a faction within the Concorde that believed any power not under their direct control was a threat to be neutralized. Commander Rostova Kask's voice boomed, dripping with cold fury. "You are to stand down immediately. Power down your vessel and prepare to be boarded. The unsanctioned activation of that artifact is an act of galactic treason. By the authority of the Concord High Council, I am here to take command of the asset and place you under arrest. Behind Kask's image, she could see the sleek predatory shapes of his fleet arranging themselves into battle formation. They were not here to talk. They were here to take. The anchorage had just defeated a powerful foe without lifting a finger, but now it faced a different kind of threat. Not one of lawless greed, but of lawful fear. A law built on fear is just a cage with a gilded door. Rostova looked from the Admiral's angry face to the calm, glowing sigil of the vast ship that had named her its steward. The vautour had been a simple problem. This was something far more dangerous. How do you fight an enemy who believes they are the law? The anchorage seemed to sense her conflict. Query it projected into her mind. Rostova took a deep breath. She was caught between a power she didn't understand and an authority she had sworn to uphold. Her next words would not just decide her own fate, but might very well define the future relationship between her civilization and the ghosts of its own forgotten past. Magister, she said, her voice steady and clear. Inform Admiral Kask that the Obsidian Anchorage is not an asset. It is a recognized legal entity under the First Concordance, a foundational authority the current Concord still claims to honor. We are not his prisoners. We are his precedent. A choice is the smallest hinge that can swing the largest door. In a remote corner of the system, a lone escape pod from the Gilded Talon drifted silently. Inside a terrified junior officer, the sole survivor watched the drama unfold on his emergency scanner. He had seen the light that had unmade his ship. He had felt the silent judgment that had vaporized his captain. He didn't understand what he had witnessed, but he knew that the age of simple piracy was over. Something new and terrible and magnificent was awake, and it was counting everyone's sins. The game had changed, not because a new weapon had been introduced, but because an old truth had been remembered. The Ordo legalist fleet began to advance, their engines burning hot against the cold void. They were an armada of modern warships bristling with the latest technology, confident in their power and their authority. They moved to encircle the ancient ship and the tiny cutter that floated beside it like a pilot fish. They saw a relic to be contained, a rogue commander to be punished. They did not understand that they were not approaching a ship. They were approaching a mirror, and it was about to show them exactly what they were. The calm silver light of the anchorage's main sigil pulsed a slow, steady heartbeat in the dark. It was waiting. It was watching. It was weighing their souls. Accountability is the price of existence. Admiral Kask watched from his command chair, his jaw tight. The cutter Vigil was refusing to stand down. Its shields were raised, a pathetic gesture against the might of his task force. More insulting was the message from its commander. Precedent. The arrogance was breathtaking. This Rostova was either a fool or a traitor, and he intended to treat her as the latter. Target the cutter's engines, Kask ordered his tactical officer. Disable it. A show of force is required. Let them see the consequences of defying the Concord's will. Admiral, the officer hesitated. The artifact. Its energy readings are fluctuating. It seems to be reacting to our weapon locks. It's a machine, Lieutenant. It can be controlled. Fire on my mark. Rostova stood on her bridge, her ship too small, her position too exposed. Gian was running frantic tactical simulations, each one ending in their swift annihilation. Ben was monitoring the anchorage, his expression one of rapt terror. Commander, its internal geometry is shifting. It's reconfiguring itself. I'm reading quantum-level energy manipulations. It's not preparing to fight. It's preparing to teach. The universe remembers every shortcut and every lie. Before Cask could give the order to fire, the anchorage acted. It did not power up weapons. It did not raise shields. It simply broadcast a single open, unencrypted data packet to the entire conquered fleet. It was a message of impeccable logic and crystalline clarity. The message contained two things. First was a complete sensor log of the Vigil's encounter with the Vautour Syndicate. It showed Oren's illegal salvage attempt, his unprovoked attack, and the anchorage's response, a perfect energy-neutral reflection of the aggressor's own force. It was an unimpeachable record of self-defense presented not as an argument, but as a mathematical proof. Second was a legal query. It cited Article 1 of the Concord's own founding charter. The authority of the Concord is derived from the consent of its people and the preservation of universal law, including all precedents established by recognized ancestral polities. It then respectfully cross-referenced this with its own core programming, identifying itself as a vessel of the first concordance, the ultimate ancestral polity. The query was simple. History does not repeat, but its echoes can be deafening. The message rippled through the Ordo fleet. Captains on a dozen bridges read the query. It was not a threat. It was a challenge, a legal move of such profound elegance that it disarmed them more effectively than any weapon could. They were a fleet of lawkeepers, and they had just been asked to justify their actions under the very laws they were sworn to uphold. To fire now would be to admit that their authority came from the mouths of their cannons, not from the rule of law. Admiral Cask's face went purple with rage. He was being challenged not with torpedoes, but with jurisprudence. "It's a trick," he roared. A sophism programmed by a rogue commander. Maintain weapon locks, but he could feel the hesitation while on his own bridge. His officers were exchanging uneasy glances. They were soldiers of the Concord, not a tyrant's private army. The anchorage's logic was flawless. Their own position was suddenly terrifyingly ambiguous. A system's strength is measured by the questions it allows. Rostova saw her chance. This was the crux of it all. The anchorage wouldn't fight for her. It would only provide the truth. It was up to her to wield it. Magister, open a channel to the entire task force. Bypass the Admiral's command frequency. Channel open, Commander. This is Commander Rostova of the Vigil. She broadcast, her voice ringing with a conviction she hadn't known she possessed. You have seen the anchorage's logs. You have read its query. We have not committed an act of treason. We have witnessed an act of justice. The ship before you is not a weapon to be seized. It is our oldest heritage, a living library of the law you swore to protect. She paused, letting her words sink in. Admiral Cask is ordering you to fire on a vessel that has just upheld conquered law against a known criminal. He is ordering you to do so without legal justification, in direct violation of the foundational charter. The Obsidian Anchorage asks for a precedent. I ask for your conscience. Conscience is the last shield against the darkness. On the bridge of the destroyer Steadfast, a young captain looked at the tactical display. He saw the tiny cutter, the majestic, silent artifact, and the flagship of his own admiral, whose orders felt increasingly unlawful. He had taken an oath to the Concord, not to one man's fear. He made a choice. Helm, the captain ordered quietly. Power down main batteries. Raise forward shields, but direct all power to passive sensors. We are assuming a neutral observation posture. One by one, on other ships, similar orders were given. A weapon lock indicator would blink out. A ship would shift its position, slightly breaking the perfect encirclement. It wasn't a mutiny. It was a quiet, cascading crisis of faith. Cask's fleet was dissolving around him, not through violence, but through the simple, powerful act of individuals choosing to question an unjust order. The admiral watched his fleet unravel. His authority was evaporating. The raw power of his warships was useless against an idea. He had been defeated without a single shot being fired against him. He was a warrior, and he had been outmaneuvered in a battle of pure reason. True power does not need to be declared. The anchorage sent to Rostova a feeling of serene approval washing over her. The crisis had passed. The immediate threat was gone. But Rostova knew the larger battle had just begun. The Ordo legalists would not forget this humiliation. The existence of the obsidian anchorage changed everything. It was a new power in the galaxy, but one that played by very old rules. Humanity had just been handed a key to its own past, and with it a profound and terrifying responsibility. Her gaze fell upon the central sigil of the anchorage, the balanced scale within the circle. It pulsed with a steady, eternal light. It was a promise, a warning, a declaration that the universe was not chaotic, that actions had consequences, and that the long arc of history, however slowly, would always bend toward justice. It was an anchor in the storm of stars, and she was its steward. The weight was immense, but for the first time in a long time she did not feel alone. A single act of courage can recalibrate the stars. The silence that followed was heavier than any warship. On a dozen bridges across the Ordo legalist fleet, captains and crews sat frozen, caught between a direct order from a superior and a direct challenge to their fundamental purpose. The air crackled with unspoken mutiny, a rebellion not of violence but of principle. Admiral Kask's face on the main view screen was a mask of thunderous disbelief. He had brought a hammer to crack a nut, only to find the nut was a singularity of pure, unassailable logic. He had lost, and he knew it. His fleet was no longer his. It belonged to its conscience. A law ignored is a poison taken willingly. With a final snarled curse that his calm officer wisely muted, Kask's image vanished. The flagship, the indomitable Will, turned first. Its movements were sullen, heavy with the weight of humiliation. It pivoted with agonizing slowness, a predator forced to abandon its kill, and then its drive flared, tearing a hole in space-time as it jumped away. One by one, the other ships followed their departures, a cascade of silent, reluctant acknowledgments of defeat. They left behind the tiny cutter Vigil and the immense patient darkness of the ship that had outmaneuvered them with nothing more than a question. Rostova sagged against her command chair, the tension draining out of her in a dizzying rush. Her crew was silent, their faces a mixture of relief, shock, and dawning comprehension. They hadn't just survived. They had participated in a paradigm shift. Ben Rostova said, her voice hoarse. "Give me a status report on the anchorage." "It's quiet," Commander Carter replied, his voice filled with reverence. "The light from the sigils has dimmed back to its resting state. It's like it just exhaled. The energy it focused from the pulsar, the data it broadcast. It was all done with no discernible power draw. It operates on principles we don't have the physics for yet. An old truth is the most powerful kind of new technology." Commander Magister interjected, its synthesized tone unchanged, yet the words carried a new weight. "The anchorage is extending a docking invitation. It is not a tractor beam or a magnetic clamp. It appears to be a localized distortion of space-time, creating a stable isthmus between our airlock and a corresponding portal on its hull." Jian Li laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "It's inviting us over for tea." "Then we'd be rude to refuse," Rostova said, pushing herself to her feet. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a profound sense of purpose. She was no longer just a patrol commander. She was an envoy to the past and the steward of a power that could reshape the future. "Ben, you're with me. Jian, you have the bridge. Keep a long-range sensor sweep active. The Ordo legalists are wounded, and wounded animals are unpredictable. The journey across the shimmering isthmus was like walking through a tunnel of frozen light. The air was still and held a faint, clean scent like ozone and old stone. On the other side, a section of the anchorage's obsidian hull had retracted, opening into a vast chamber. The interior was not a maze of corridors and conduits, but a single immense open space that seemed to defy gravity. Crystalline structures like the branches of a glass forest grew from the floor and ceiling, each one pulsing with soft internal light. The air hummed with the same resonant frequency. The vigil had felt a deep and calming thrum that vibrated in their bones. Memory in its purest form is a structure, not a story. A glowing sphere of silver light detached itself from a nearby crystal and drifted towards them. It projected no voice, but its meaning was clear in their minds, an extension of the anchorage's consciousness. It communicated. The designation made Ben flush with a mixture of pride and inadequacy. "Archivist," he whispered. The sphere pulsed. Rostova walked deeper into the chamber, her boots making no sound on the strange, seamless floor. An accounting of what the sphere replied. "A promise kept is a universe earned." Back in the Concorde's sector capital, Admiral Kask was not idle. Humiliation had quickly curdled into a cold, calculated fury. He couldn't attack the anchorage directly. The captains of his fleet were now witnesses to its lawful nature. Openly defying the anchorage's legal precedent would be political suicide. But the law had loopholes. It had back doors. And the Ordo legalists were masters of both. In a closed-door session with his faction's leaders, he laid out a new strategy. He painted Rostova not as a hero, but as a cult leader seduced by an ancient alien intelligence masquerading as a human artifact. He spun the anchorage not as a judge, but as a weapon of terrifying unknown potential. Fear, he knew, was a far more powerful motivator than reason. "We can't seize it," Kask argued, his voice low and conspiratorial. "But we can contain it. We declare the entire Epsilon Eridani system a quarantine zone. We cite the potential for mimetic contagion from an unsanctioned Class A artifact. We will build a narrative of caution, of protecting the Concorde from a power it does not understand. Then, once the system is isolated, we can sterilize it, for the good of all. Fear is the rust of the body politic." A junior aide in the room felt a chill run down his spine. Sterilize was a clean word for something monstrous. He had a cousin who worked a shipping route near that system. He pictured her face, the easy smile she always wore. He said nothing, but that night he copied the meeting's minutes onto a secure data chip. He knew a Concord senator, an idealist from the outer colonies, who had always spoken of the law as a shield for the weak, not a club for the powerful. He decided to make a very dangerous delivery. On the anchorage, days turned into weeks. Rostova and her crew began the monumental task of interfacing with the ancient vessel. Magister, its logic core now linked directly to the anchorage's data streams, was evolving at an astonishing rate. It was no longer just a fleet mind. It was becoming a true philosopher of law, capable of parsing millennia of legal theory in a microsecond. Ben Carter was in paradise. He discovered that the anchorage's archives were not just text and images. They were full sensory, immersive records of historical events, allowing one to stand on the floor of the First Concordance Senate or witness the signing of a treaty on a world that no longer existed. It was the ultimate primary source. A fact cannot be argued with. It can only be ignored. One day, while exploring a deep archive node, Rostova stumbled upon a problem. It was a simulation, a legal quandary the anchorage had been pondering for centuries. It concerned two colony worlds, Praxis and Themis, locked in a bitter generations-long dispute over water rights to a shared asteroid belt. The conquered courts had been gridlocked for decades, with both sides presenting compelling but contradictory historical claims. The conflict was simmering, threatening to boil over into open war. Magister Rostova asked, standing within the glowing holographic representation of the disputed territory. "Can the anchorage solve this?" The term "solve" is imprecise, Commander. The AI replied, its voice now holding a new, richer timbre. The anchorage does not generate solutions. It reveals the truth of the ledger. The truth once revealed often makes the correct path self-evident. Rostova nodded. "Then do it. Access all records pertaining to the Praxis-Themis dispute. Find the truth." A vignette began to play out in the minds of the people of Themis. A grandmother told her grandchild a story, a familiar tale of how the brave settlers of Themis had first charted the ice-rich asteroids, only to have their claims stolen by the deceitful latecomers from Praxis. It was a story told in every classroom, a foundational myth that fueled their righteous anger. The child looked up at the dry, cracked riverbeds outside their window and felt the injustice burn in her small heart. The anchorage began its work. It cross-referenced its own vast archives with the current Concord public records. It analyzed geological data ship logs from the initial colonization period, private journals, and corporate filings. It was a search for a single foundational moment of truth buried under a mountain of lies, legends, and litigation. The cost of a lie is that you must remember it. The beauty of the truth is that it remembers you. The result, when it came, was not a lengthy legal brief. It was a single, undeniable piece of evidence. The anchorage projected it into the main chamber for Rostova to see. It was the original corporate charter for the colonization of Praxis, filed 300 years ago. And in the fine print, clear as day, was a clause deeding sole and perpetual water rights of the entire asteroid belt to the future inhabitants of Themis as a concession for Praxis receiving the more desirable planetary location. The founders of Praxis had gotten their world and had given away the ice in return. Over the centuries, through clerical errors, deliberate obfuscation, and the slow erosion of memory, that clause had been forgotten. The foundational myth of Themis was true. The foundational claim of Praxis was a lie built on a forgotten contract. The anchorage didn't broadcast this finding with fanfare. It simply and discreetly deposited the authenticated, incorruptible document into the public docket of the conquered Central Court. It was a single file, a drop of truth in an ocean of noise. But it was a truth that could not be refuted. A court of law is a place where evidence is weighed. A court of justice is a place where truth is recognized. Within hours, the legal landscape of the entire sector had changed. The Praxis government, faced with irrefutable proof of their forebears' agreement, had no choice but to concede. The war that had been brewing for generations was averted not by a fleet, but by a file. On Themis, there was stunned celebration. The grandmother hugged her grandchild, tears streaming down her face, not just for the water that would now flow, but for the vindication of a truth she had only ever known as a story. The news of the Praxis resolution spread like wildfire. The obsidian anchorage was no longer just a mysterious artifact. It was a symbol of hope, a tool that could untangle the knots of history and deliver bloodless justice. Support for Rostova and her stewardship swelled across the conquered, and that terrified the Ordo legalists more than anything. The anonymous aide's data chip had reached Senator Tovar. After seeing the Praxis resolution, the senator knew the threat was real. He stood before the Concord High Council and revealed Kask's plan for the sterilization of Epsilon Eridani. The chamber erupted in chaos. The legalists denied everything, branding the minutes as forgeries and Tovar as a fearmonger. They pushed harder for the quarantine, framing it as a vital security measure against an artifact that was now clearly capable of interfering in galactic politics. The council was divided. The fear was potent. The power to rewrite history, even to reveal its truth, was a terrifying one. The motion for quarantine passed by a single narrow vote. A massive fleet, under the command of Kask's most loyal subordinate, was dispatched to enforce it. Their orders were public to secure the system's perimeter. Their secret orders were to deploy a singularity torpedo, a weapon that would collapse the system's star into a black hole, erasing the anchorage, the vigil, and everything else from existence. A secret kept by too many is no longer a secret, it is a conspiracy. Rostova received the news from Senator Tovar via a tightly encrypted channel. The message was grim. The fleet was coming. The weapon was real. There was no legal appeal left. The Concord's own laws were being twisted into a noose. "We can't fight them," Jian said, her face ashen as she looked at the tactical display showing the approaching armada. "There are hundreds of them. And we can't run," Ben added. "The anchorage is ancient. It has no F-space drive. It's a sublight vessel. It is, as its name suggests, an anchor." Rostova looked at the calm, crystalline forest around her. The anchorage felt serene, unbothered. It had faced down tyrants and empires. This was just another entry in its long, long ledger. But it wouldn't act on its own behalf. It required a lawful directive from its steward. It held up a mirror to Oren, Rostova said, thinking aloud. It used his own energy against him. It revealed a single truth to solve the praxis dispute. The pattern is consistent. It doesn't create force. It clarifies consequence. A mirror shows you what you are not, what you wish to be. They are coming here to commit an act of profound illegality, she continued, a plan beginning to form in her mind, a terrible and magnificent gamble. They are using the law as a shield for a crime. So we will use the law as a weapon. She turned to the glowing sphere that served as the anchorage's interface. Can you project a field, not a shield to block energy, but a field to audit it? A field that measures an action against the law it claims to represent. The sphere pulsed gently. A legal injunction made real, Ben whispered, his eyes wide with understanding. You want it to project a field where the universe itself enforces the law. Yes, Rostova said. They are coming to destroy this system in the name of Concord law. But their action is a violation of that very law. We will make the universe see that contradiction. Accountability is not a punishment. It is a physical law of the moral universe. The anchorage communicated. Do it, Rostova commanded. She felt the weight of her choice. She was about to ask this ancient, magnificent being to wound itself for them. In a small, grimy bar on a fringe world trading post, the lone survivor of the Gilded Talon saw the news on a public screen. He saw the conquered fleet moving to quarantine the system where his life had been unmade. He saw the face of Eva Rostova, the woman who had spoken to the ghost ship. And for the first time he understood. The light that had vaporized his ship hadn't been an act of war. It had been an act of balance. He picked up his drink, and in a quiet, anonymous toast, he wished her luck. He knew which side the universe was on. The Ordo legalist fleet arrived. It was a wall of steel and fire, a declaration of overwhelming power. They took up their positions, forming a perfect sphere around the Epsilon Eridani system. The flagship, the Iron Hand, moved to the optimal firing position. On its bridge, the new admiral, a grim-faced Kask loyalist, gave the order. Broadcast the final quarantine warning as per the Council's directive. Then launch the torpedo. The warning was sent. Rostova on the bridge of the Vigil, docked deep within the anchorage, broadcast her final reply. It was sent on all channels, an open message to the entire Concord. This is Steward Rostova of the Obsidian Anchorage. The fleet before you is preparing to commit an act of extrajudicial destruction in violation of Concord Charter Article 1 and the precedent of non-aggression you yourselves acknowledged. The anchorage is a sanctuary of law. This action is illegal. We will not meet your unlawful force with force. We will meet it with clarity. The Admiral on the Iron Hand scoffed. Clarity, the ramblings of a heretic. Fire. The Singularity torpedo launched. It was a sleek black dart, a pinprick of contained chaos. It accelerated towards the system's sun, programmed to collapse it on impact. And then the anchorage acted. The great crystalline arrays on its surface, the ones that had focused the pulsar's light, began to glow. But this time they did not project a beam. They projected an absence, a field of pure concept. It expanded outwards at the speed of light, silent and invisible. It was a zone of truth, a place where lies had no energy. The field washed over the Singularity torpedo. Inside the weapon, sophisticated processors analyzed its trajectory. Its mission was to enforce a Concord Council directive. That was its legal justification. But the anchorage's field cross-referenced that directive with the foundational charter. It found the contradiction. The directive was born of fear and conspiracy, a violation of the very law it claimed to serve. The premise of the action was false. Therefore, the action could not proceed. The torpedo's navigation system failed. Its containment field flickered. The Singularity at its heart, no longer constrained by a valid purpose, simply evaporated. The torpedo became a dead, inert piece of metal tumbling uselessly through space. A lie is a debt to reality, and reality always collects. On the bridge of the Iron Hand, alarms blared. Sir, the torpedo is inert, all systems failing. It's just dead. The Admiral stared, his face a mask of confusion. What happened? Did they fire some kind of EMP? No, sir. The sensor officer reported, his voice trembling. All our systems are fine. It was just the torpedo. It's as if it decided the mission was a mistake. Before the Admiral could process this, the anchorage's final broadcast went out. It sent the complete unredacted minutes of CASC's secret meeting. It sent the sensor logs of the failed Singularity torpedo. And it sent a simple, devastatingly clear analysis showing how the torpedo's failure was a direct consequence of its unlawful orders. The lie had been exposed, and the weapon built on that lie had refused to function. The cost of victory was real. Deep within the anchorage, several of the great crystalline arrays went dark, hairline fractures appearing on their perfect surfaces. The resonant hum of the great ship faltered, dropping in pitch before stabilizing at a lower, more weary tone. On the Vigil, a wave of energy feedback blew out half the bridge consoles. Ben Carter cried out, shielding his eyes as his terminal exploded in a shower of sparks. The light had blinded him, searing his retinas. Gian was thrown from her station, her arm twisted at an unnatural angle. The price for a miracle had been paid. The revelation of CASC's conspiracy, combined with the impossible public failure of his plan, shattered the Ordo legalist faction. The Concord Council, faced with undeniable proof of a plot to commit mass destruction, was thrown into turmoil. CASC and his cronies were arrested. The quarantine was lifted. The fleet, now under the command of a moderate captain from the Steadfast, retreated in disarray and shame. A new precedent was locked into the Concord's legal framework, written by Senator Tovar himself. The Anchorage Doctrine. It recognized the obsidian anchorage and any similar relics as sovereign legal entities. Their stewards were granted diplomatic status. Any act of aggression against them would be considered a direct assault on the foundational laws of the Concord. The victory was absolute. Rostova stood in the now quieter main chamber of the anchorage. Jian's arm was in a medical brace and Ben was recovering his sight slowly, returning but forever changed. The scars were a reminder of the cost. She looked at the dimmed crystals, feeling the weariness of the ancient being around her. It had wounded itself to protect the law to protect them. Her sense of stewardship was no longer a duty. It was a bond of shared sacrifice. Magister's voice came from a nearby console, now the permanent link between the two ships. The Concord High Council has ratified the doctrine, Commander. The ledger is balanced. The precedent is set. Rostova touched one of the great sleeping crystals. Its light was faint, but it was still there, waiting to be rekindled. The anchorage had taught them that the law was not just a set of rules written in a book. It was a force of nature, as real as gravity, as powerful as a star. It was the architecture of civilization, and if you aligned yourself with it, the universe itself would become your shield. A new entry began to form on the central ledger, a single line of silver light blinking into existence, logging the formal ratification of the new doctrine. It was the first entry in a new chapter written not in the distant past, but today. The universe does not care for your laws, but it bends to your choices.